This week on Vatican Connections, following the conclusion of the Jubilee Year of Mercy, Pope Francis meets with organizers who made it all possible. The Holy Father sends his condolences to the Cuban people following the death of Fidel Castro, and it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas at the Vatican. Hello and welcome to Vatican Connections. I'm Emily Callan. It is beginning to look like Christmas at the Vatican, and last Sunday began the season of Advent, and throughout the whole month of December right into January, the Pope's agenda isn't catching a break. Every year, a Christmas tree and a nativity scene finds a home in St. Peter's Square. The tree has already been shipped to Rome from the city of Trento in northern Italy and will be lit on December 9th. The ornaments were made with the help of sick children in hospital, and the nativity scene will originate from the island of Malta, and it will include a replica of a Maltese boat representing the experience of migrants crossing the sea to Italy. The Pope's schedule for December and January includes a Mass to mark the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe on December 12th. This event is of particular importance to Pope Francis. Ancient hymns will be sung in indigenous languages, and the choir is made up of the Sistine Chapel Choir as well as the Latin American Choir. Eduardo Nortrica from Buenos Aires will be conducting the ensemble. On December 24th, the Holy Father will celebrate Christmas Mass in St. Peter's Basilica and will give his traditional Urbi et Orbi address the next day from the papal balcony. Part of the Christmas traditions surrounding the Vatican also include the Pope presiding a prayer service on December 31st with the singing of the Te Deum. On January 1st, the Feast of Mary, Mother of God, Pope Francis will again preside Mass in St. Peter's, as he will do so again for Epiphany. And finally, on January 8th, he will celebrate Mass and baptize babies in the Sistine Chapel, marking the feast of the baptism of our Lord. The Vatican released the Holy Father's message for the 54th World Day of Prayer for Vocations, which will be celebrated on May 7th, 2017. The day highlights especially the particular call to priestly and religious vocations. The title of his message is Led by the Spirit for Mission. In his message, the Holy Father highlights two essential aspects of the Christian life, one missionary and the other the importance of the ecclesial community. The first is the call of each baptized person to go out, and the second is the place where God's call is born, nourished, and expressed. Commitment to mission, he says, is not something added on to the Christian life as a kind of decoration, but instead as an essential element of faith itself. To have a relationship with God, the Pope reminds us, means to be sent out. Weaknesses, temptations, a sense of inadequacy, pessimism should not discourage the Christian missionary because Jesus is at his side every step of the way. This is particularly true, he said, for priests and consecrated persons. The Church needs people who are confident in God's love, which requires patience. The seed of faith is planted, and Jesus is the one who makes it grow. Then the Holy Father offers three gospel stories to reflect on the inauguration of Christ's mission in the synagogue at Nazareth, the journey he makes with the disciples of Emmaus, and the parable of the sower and the seed. He reaffirms that mission and a renewal in vocations can only come from a contemplative and prayerful life. It requires friendship with the Lord. On Wednesday, the Holy Father held his weekly general audience, and pilgrims gathered in Pope Paul VI Hall. He completed his catechesis series on the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which he had begun during the Jubilee year. He again reiterated that though the Holy Year has ended, everyone is invited to continue the practice of mercy.
The last of the corporal works of mercy, burying the dead, is not untimely. when we think of the many people who risk their lives in order to give decent burial to the victims of war and armed conflict in various parts of our world. Like Joseph of Arimathea, who offered his own tomb for the burial of Jesus, we Christians devoutly bury our dead in hope of the resurrection. The last of the spiritual works of mercy, praying for the living and the dead, is especially meaningful in this month of November, when we commemorate all the faithful departed. Prayer for the living and the dead is an eloquent expression of the communion of saints. Let us open our hearts to the Holy Spirit, who knows our deepest desires and hopes, and embrace in our prayer all those in any kind of need. May the corporal and spiritual works of mercy on which we have meditated throughout the Holy Year continue to inspire and guide our Christian lives on the path of God's mercy.
At the general audience, Pope Francis also expressed his sadness after learning of the plane crash which killed 71 Brazilians, including players of the country's soccer team, on Tuesday. He said, "I would like to remember today the suffering of the Brazilian people for the tragedy involving the football team and to pray for the players and for their families." He had also sent a message of condolences to the Archbishop of Brasilia in Brazil and imparted his apostolic blessing. Martin Scorsese was at the Vatican on Wednesday after a screening of his latest movie, Silence, for some 300 Jesuits in Rome. The Pope received him in a private audience which lasted about 15 minutes. Scorsese was accompanied by his family and the producer of the film, which depicts the persecution of Jesuit missionaries in Japan in the 17th century. It is based on a book by Japanese author Shusaku Endo. Pope Francis told them that he had read the book, and as a young man, he had even dreamed of being a missionary in Japan. At the end of their private meeting, Scorsese gave the Pope 2 paintings by an 18th century Japanese artist, and then the Holy Father offered each one of them a rosary. Vatican Radio got to interview the Italo-American director while he was in Rome. Here's just a brief glimpse at their conversation. Martin Scorsese explains what the title of the movie means to him.
Well, I grew up in tenements, or you call the slums, I guess, and there was no silence. The only silence was in the Catholic St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. It was quiet in there, and I'd be in there a lot. But I grew up with the symphony around me of laughter, arguing, fighting, music of all kinds coming from windows and stores, horns, cars, also the cries of the vendors, men who would come around and in Italian and shout for people to bring around their knives so you can sharpen the knives. And it was almost like 19th century, a 19th century village in a way where we were on Elizabeth Street. And so for me, that cacophony of noise, unlike today though, not television sounds, and that cacophony, different music, all kinds of music, people speaking different languages, for me, that's how I grew up, and that's how I saw the world. That's how I interpreted the world. So my films are filled with that. They just are, and they get somewhat frenetic that way. There's no doubt. But over the years, the quiet is what I've been trying to be able to achieve a kind of serenity. At first, I was frightened of it. I was frightened of the aloneness and the quiet. There was a big change when I went to Jerusalem in 1983 to try to get the locations for Last Temptation of Christ, and being around the Holy City and visiting certain sites. It made a big change in my life. Music is very important to me, so music was on all the time. But there, something happened in Jerusalem, in the Church of Golgotha. Afterwards, there was a peace and a serenity that hit me. Ultimately, it's been reaching towards silence. I always said, after finishing Raging Bull, there was an interview going on. I said, no, we have to learn how just to be in a room by ourselves with nothing. I said, if you can do that, that would be amazing. And so eventually it led to a number of films, the George Harrison film, the Bob Dylan, and the Harrison one is where I started with meditation. And that has helped. There's a room I have in my house which is soundproof, and I go in there. And I find myself just sometimes with no sound. And there is sound. Silence has a sound. No, silence is very important. Also for a person who talks a lot, me, silence is also on this picture, finding what the silence sounds like. And we did, I think. I don't know if we succeeded in the film, but there's something about the nature of the atmosphere of a room, the atmosphere of a village street, and particularly the landscape, finding yourself on the top of a mountain. Or we'd hear the sounds. These birds were amazing. The frogs were amazing. So all of this became the track of the film. There's no music.
The Holy Father also met with another prominent figure this past week. Stephen Hawking was at the Vatican on Monday and attended an audience between the Pope and members of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. The Academy, which was established in the mid-19th century, held a plenary session between November 25th and November 29th. Their main focus was on sustainability. And the well-known cosmologist and physicist had given a talk at the opening of their plenary session on the origin of the universe. It wasn't the first time Stephen Hawking visited the Vatican, as he became a member of the Academy in 1986. And so he, along with other leading scientists participating in the plenary, gathered in the consistory hall in the Vatican to hear Pope Francis speak on a topic close to his heart. Never before has there been such a clear need for science to be at the service of a new global ecological equilibrium, Pope Francis said at the beginning of his address, and recognized the shared goal of the scientific and Christian communities to protect our common home. Borrowing from his encyclical Laudato Si, he reminded them that they are to be cooperators in protecting and developing the life and biodiversity of the planet and of human life, and spoke again of a need for an ecological conversion, a term he has used many times to describe the shift which needs to happen so that care for the environment does not lose sight of care for the human person. Scientists are in a unique position, the Pope explained, free of political, economic, or ideological interests. Their research can therefore benefit everyone and instruct those who are in positions of power. He mentioned the weak reaction and delay of some to implementing global agreements on the environment because of their submission to a technology and an economy which seek profit above all else. Finally, despite the harm we see inflicted on the environment and on peoples, there are many encouraging signs of solidarity, he said. And finally, imparting his blessing, he asked them to pray for him. It's already been close to 2 weeks since the end of the Jubilee Year of Mercy, and lots of work went into preparing the activities and events surrounding the Holy Year. Last Monday, the Holy Father made it a point to thank organizers, security staff, and members of the Pontifical Council for the new evangelization who spearheaded the Jubilee celebrations. Pope Francis began by expressing his gratitude to them and specifically mentioned Archbishop Rino Fisichella, who had been entrusted with the organization of the Jubilee Year with the collaboration of the Vatican Office for the new evangelization. He also went on to thank certain civil authorities such as the Minister of Interior, Chief of Police, the Vatican Gendarmerie, the Swiss Guards, health structures, as well as the city of Rome, which welcomed over 20 million pilgrims in 1 year. He told them they made it possible for this event of grace to be celebrated in an orderly and safe manner. He thanked the numerous volunteers who came from all over the world and said, now that the year has ended, mercy must continue to be inserted into everyday life and become a permanent commitment and lifestyle for believers. And finally, he told them, with your commitment, not only did you offer a competent contribution, but you rendered a true service of mercy to millions of pilgrims who came to Rome. As mentioned earlier, the new liturgical season began last Sunday. On the first Sunday of Advent, Pope Francis offered a reflection on one of the most representative themes of Advent, he said, that of the Lord's visit to humanity. Catholic News Service has more.
Signore, oggi ci parla di quella che avverrà alla fine dei tempi. Dice Gesù, come nei giorni che precedettero il diluvio, mangiavano e bevevano, prendevano moglie e prendevano marito fino al giorno in cui Noè entrò nell'arca e non si accorsero di nulla finché venne il diluvio e travolse tutti. Così dice Gesù. Sempre ci colpisce pensare alle ore che precedono una grande calamità. Tutti sono tranquilli, fanno le cose solite senza rendersi conto che la loro vita sta per essere stravolta. Il Vangelo certamente non vuole farci paura, ma aprire il nostro orizzonte alla dimensione ulteriore, più grande, che da una parte relativizza le cose di ogni giorno, ma al tempo stesso le rende preziose, decisive. Da questa prospettiva viene anche un invito alla sobrietà, a non essere dominati dalle cose di questo mondo, dalle realtà materiali, ma piuttosto a governarle. Se al contrario ci lasciamo condizionare e sopraffare da esse, non possiamo percepire che c'è qualcosa di molto importante, il nostro incontro finale con il Signore. Questo è l'importante.
Last weekend, Fidel Castro, the former leader of the Cuban people, passed away. Certainly a controversial figure. On one hand, some remember him as an uncompromising dictator, and on the other, as a symbol against imperialism. But what were relations like between the Catholic Church and Cuba? He did meet, after all, the last three popes. Matteo Cioffi sheds light on these pages of the Church's history.
This coming Sunday will be held in Cuba Fidel Castro's funeral. He died last week at the age of 90. The government announced following his death 9 days of national mourning for one of the most popular and controversial figures of the last 60 years. In Cuba, opening to the world and the world to Cuba, the Catholic Church had a fundamental role to play. It's no surprise then that the leader Maximo, in nearly 50 years of power over the Cuban island, met on 4 occasions the last 3 pontiffs. In 1996, Fidel Castro was received at the Vatican for the first time by St. John Paul II, and 2 years later received the Polish Pope himself to Cuba. A few days before pontiffs arrived, Castro, based on a pre-existing agreement, freed 160 prisoners for a request of the Vatican Secretary of State at that time, Cardinal Angelo Sodano. At the end of his trip, the Pope expressed great faith in the future of Cuba, a future which revealed its first fruits in 2012 with Benedict XVI. As a direct result of his visit, the government of Raúl Castro allowed Catholics to celebrate Good Friday. That same year, churches throughout the country were allowed to have an outdoor procession. It was the first time in decades. The meeting between Benedict and Fidel was held at the residence of the Apostolic Nuncio in Cuba, and after a long and cordial conversation, Fidel Castro wanted to know what the Pope really did. In September 2015, during his trip to Havana, Pope Francis had a face-to-face meeting with Fidel. Their meeting lasted 30 minutes and described by the Vatican as friendly and informal. 2 leaders, 2 fighters, one ahead of the other to talk about the common human problems, including environmental degradation. In this regard, the Pope's gift was the encyclical Laudato Si, as well as the text of an Italian priest, Alessandro Ponzato, and one of a Spanish Jesuit, Armando Llorente. Only a few months earlier, in May 2015, Raúl Castro, in a private audience at the Vatican with Bergoglio, had reminded to the pontiff that he had studied with the Jesuits, like his brother Fidel Castro, adding, "If the Pope continues on this way, I will return to the Catholic Church." Last Saturday, on hearing the news of the death of Cuba's former president, the telegram of condolences from the Holy See was immediately released and addressed to the Castro's family, a telegram in which the Pope expressed his grief as well as the closeness to all Cuban people and to the entire island.
The 2016 Ratzinger Prize winners were announced on November 18th, and last Saturday in the morning, Pope Francis gave them a special address. The Holy Father recalled the depth of Joseph Ratzinger's thought, firmly founded upon Scripture and the Church Fathers, which is also nourished by faith and prayer. Sharing his gratefulness for the Pope Emeritus, he also remarked on how Ratzinger's reference point was always the person of Jesus Christ, charity, hope, and faith. The award given by the Joseph Ratzinger Benedict XVI Vatican Foundation underlines the contributions of experts in the field of theology. The winners this year are Monsignor Enos Bifi, professor, theologian, and liturgist, and Professor Ioannis Kourampeles, an Orthodox who teaches at a university in Greece. Again, on Saturday, the Holy Father met with young Italians who volunteer with their country's national civil service. Close to 7,000 of them gathered in Pope Paul VI Hall, 15 years, the Pope said, after the promulgation of the law that the National Civil Service instituted in Italy. And he recalled the contribution of the service in the aftermath of the earthquake which struck central Italy last August. And to the volunteers, he said that they are a precious and dynamic force in the country. The Holy Father recognized the dedication and gratuitousness of the young volunteers in the many projects led by the National Civil Service. Solidarity is the aim of every civil community that wishes to be egalitarian and fraternal. But there are attitudes which betray this solidarity. The Pope named passivity, indifference, oppression, and discrimination. But you are called to think and act in a different way, he told them. He went on to name areas where their service is especially invaluable, where the environment and human ecology is concerned, and aid to refugees and migrants. He also mentioned any project which supports children, the disabled, the marginalized, and the poor. He continued, "Dear young people, I hope you will follow the way that gives fullness of meaning and joy to your life. This way is not the same for all, but everyone can find the one most adapted to his personality, to his gifts and situations. The one element which is common to all, however, is the call to service." Every month, the Holy Father releases his prayer intentions through a global initiative launched by the Pope World Prayer Network, or the Apostleship of Prayer in the United States. They call it the Pope Video. The Pope's evangelization intention for December is that the peoples of Europe may rediscover the beauty, goodness, and truth of the gospel, which gives joy and hope to life. And his universal intention is found here.
En este mundo que ha desarrollado las tecnologías más sofisticadas, se venden armas que terminan en las manos de niños soldados. Debemos hacer todo lo posible para que se respete la dignidad de los niños y terminar con esta forma de esclavitud. Seas quien seas, y estás tan conmovido como yo, te pido que te unas en esta intención, para que en ninguna parte del mundo existan niños soldados.
So many women are overwhelmed with the burdens of life and the drama of violence. The Lord wants them to be free and their dignity respected. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them via Vatican Connections Twitter page at Vatican Connections. I'll be happy to answer them on our next episode. And that's all for tonight. Thanks for watching. Take care and see you next week.